Sure.
Yeah, so good morning. I'm the Coronado Public Library Director, Sean Briley. Thank you for joining us today for this expert panel about how race issues are reported in the media and the importance of various perspectives. So this event is part of the Community Read project, which this year is focusing on the book Stamped from the Beginning, A History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram Kendi. And joining us today, I'm going to go how I see you on my screen, left to right. Laura Castañeda, the award-winning bilingual journalist who currently works as a community opinion editor for the San Diego Union Tribune. We also have with us LaMonica Peters, who's a freelance reporter, correct, but at CBS Channel 8 and in San Diego, and Max Rivlin-Nadler, an investigative journalist whose reportings appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, and of course KPBS. Today's panel moderator is Dean Nelson, the director of the journalism program at Point Loma Nazarene University. He's an author and freelance contributor to publications that include the New York Times and Boston Globe. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panel, please type them into the chat option at the bottom of the screen if you're viewing this live on Zoom, and we'll get them to them if we can. So thank you for joining us for what's sure to be an interesting and important discussion. And over to you, Dean.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for hosting this, what I think is a really, really important discussion and conversation. And props to the library. Let me just give a shout out to the library before we get going here. This is the role of the library, is to help foster deep conversations and deeper understanding of our communities. And so thank you for fulfilling that role. So let's start with our panelists, where it just seems to me that last year, the year 2020, was this enormous wake-up call. We had the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so many others. There were Black Lives Matter protests. There were books like Stamped and Isabel Wilkinson's Cast came out. It just seemed to me that it revealed a tremendous amount of unfinished business in American society when it comes to honestly talking about race and dealing with some of our history. So Laura, I want to start with you. You've been here, you've been in San Diego the longest. What, in your opinion, what role do the news media play in either helping us understand these issues better, and how do the news media, how can we maybe not keep perpetuating stereotypes that have been kind of part of the landscape for a long time? What's our role in all this?
Thanks for that question, Dean. And you know, it's such a loaded question for me personally and professionally, because I'm not originally from San Diego. I was born and raised in inner city Chicago. I grew up in the barrio and had a very different experience than a lot of other journalists working in newsrooms across the country. So for me, the bottom line in all of this is there has to be more diversity in the newsroom, because if you don't have that diversity, then you don't have those expert experiences going to the table and those editorial meetings say, why aren't we covering this? You know, we're completely ignoring this sector of the community. And, you know, fast forward all these years from when I grew up, the only time I saw the news media in Chicago in my neighborhood was for a gang shooting or an accident. I never saw them cover anything good in my neighborhood. And so fast forward all these years later in a different city, now in San Diego, you know, that's what I've always pushed in my professional career. It's like, wow, why aren't we covering that? You know, why doesn't the newsroom know about that? And then if you look around and you start having conversations with people, you see that there's not enough managers making the decisions about what is covered, and there's not enough diversity. Bottom line, not enough diversity.
So Laura, has anything changed since you were observing this as a person in Chicago?
You know, I mean, yes, there are in terms of numbers, there are more journalists of color out there today than there were when I certainly started. And the numbers are not good enough. That's my point. So yes, there's been inroads, but there is so much more work to do. And it's a damn shame that it took the Black Lives Matter movement to expose this larger conversation. And I hate to see the lives that were lost. I hate to see the violence that occurred and the pain and the suffering that has gone along with it. But you know what? If that's what it took to get the damn conversation on the table so that we can do better, then we just need to do better.
Well, okay, so LaMonica, let me ask you similarly. Clearly, we've got a long ways to go as far as staff, management, reporters, people of color representing communities better. But what kind of a role? I'm thinking big picture first. What kind of a role does the news media have in just helping us understand these events that happened this past year, so that we just have a better idea of what's this really about?
Well, it's my belief that the role of journalism, the role of media, is to be truth seekers, to give the facts. And a lot of times that just doesn't happen. We're living in a time right now where people just make up stuff. Like it's not real, it's a lie, and they just run with it. So it's our job to make sure that the truth is being told. So in my opinion, that's the role of the media, to be honest, even when we're dealing with difficult issues of race and economics and all the things that we've had to deal with, especially in the last year. But it's our role to be honest and to tell the truth, and every perspective needs to be involved in that.
But if you look at the events of last year, and if you agree with the premise that I started with, is that as a nation we have some unfinished business in this country when it comes to race. Do we in the news media have a role to play in helping with that unfinished business?
I'm sure that we do, because the media is extremely powerful. But it's the work that we all need to do. I have a problem with people putting all the pressure on the media. You know, everybody wants to blame the media for everything that's happening, but this is really just us. In my opinion, what I do every day is put a mirror to your face. This is us. So as a society, we need to do better. And I just think, you know, it's the media's job to cover it and to say this is what's happening, and then we need to deal with it as people personally. I don't know that it's the media's job to make us all better people. We can show you what's happening, tell you about it, here are the facts, and then it's up to us to change our country and to make it better. I'm just, you know, I'm not a fan of blaming the media for everything that happens. Some of it, and a lot of this is on us. And, you know, my role is to just say, hey, this is what's happening. You can like it, you can not like it, but this is the truth. These are the facts.
You know, I think that's a really important point, that everybody looks for a scapegoat in why we're in the spot we're in, and we in the news media are easy targets. And yet, I want to keep coming back to, do we at times just kind of keep perpetuating stereotypes, or just keep going over the same old stories? You know, like to Laura's point, where we only talk about certain segments of our society when it comes to a crime or when it comes to a protest. So we do have a role in there, don't we?
Yeah, no, there are definitely gaps that need to be filled, but that goes back to what Laura was saying, that, you know, we need to do better in filling in those gaps and getting those different perspectives out there. That's the only way to make that happen. I get it. Some people aren't familiar with, you know, a neighborhood like Laura grew up in, or a neighborhood that I grew up in. I grew up in the Crenshaw district in Los Angeles. And I'll never forget, I was watching CNN one day, and they just happened to be at my local high school, Crenshaw High School. And I don't even remember what was going on there, but they literally had a lower third that said Beverly Hills. Now, this is an urban community, full of people of color. There's no way they could have thought that this was Beverly Hills, but that goes back to what Laura was saying. If there's no diversity in the newsroom, somebody in there should say, wait a minute, is that Beverly Hills? Like, really? It was just ridiculous to me. But that just goes to show you that there are gaps to be filled, and you need everybody's voice and perspective in your newsroom so that mistakes like that don't happen. And that's why it continues.
Wow, that's a big miss.
A big.
So Max, you cover the border, you cover immigration. I think you also cover certain segments of San Diego, like City Heights. You see the potential for us to just keep perpetuating stereotypes in all of this, right? And so how do we avoid that?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've seen, has always been the case of, like, if it bleeds, it leads, but it's just proliferated over the past couple of decades, especially with the rise of cable news, TV news becoming the predominant form that people engage with news, is that basically, it's a resource issue, right? Because if you're working in TV news, you got to fill up time. And a lot of time, crime is easy to do. You could get somebody to the spot to cover it. You can relate what the police are telling you, but you're not going to take that time to circle back and get at the root causes of what's happened, right? Because you're already filling the next day's lineup. So I think the predominance of TV media has kind of changed reporting, and the hollowing out of newspapers to that matter. Not to say TV and video media does some great reporting, and there is great investigative journalism, especially in San Diego. But just by virtue of the nature of the beast, a lot of these stories end up at top because we go to a shooting, top of the hour, we go to this, we go to this. It's just really front loading what are crime stories as the most important story in the city that day. And we know crime ends up happening disproportionately in certain areas, but we're not going as to why and looking at that, right? So if you're only looking, and even just from the immigration beat or from the border beat, if you're just looking at, well, people are crossing the border, right? Border Patrol caught somebody as they cross it. And that's your story for the day. The story is that Border Patrol arrested 30 people. But you're not doing, why were those 30 people crossing? Who told them to cross? Why did they feel the need to risk their life to do that? If you're not circling back to those stories, you're not getting the actual story. But the incentives as they exist right now, especially with some really stripped down newsrooms across the entire country, are just wrong.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is there are fewer journalists now than there were even 2 years ago or even 1 year ago. So if we're going to be dealing with some of these bigger issues, these more complicated issues, you're saying there just aren't enough people to do it. Is that accurate?
It would take a kind of a reorientation of what the values are in the media. And I think, you're seeing that pushback come from inside media itself, like Laura and LaMonica were saying, it comes from actually having people with diverse experiences in positions of power in newsrooms, because, honestly, there's enough people to cover important stories. You're not going to get everything, but it's basically, what are your priorities? Are your priorities basically what's easy and can be done quickly, or the thing that actually tells the story that's going to take some more time? And you know what, maybe the ratings will take a hit that week because you're not doing the huge surround story of that shooting, but you've reassigned a reporter to go into kind of the actual depths of what caused that, and where these people actually live, and how people experience daily life. And that takes somebody who has a diverse experience to make that decision, because people from outside those communities, they're just not going to see it. They're just going to see the shooting.
So LaMonica, let me follow up on what Max was just saying with you. If what we're primarily doing are these kind of quick hit types of stories without much understanding or context behind them, and I don't want to be in a position of blaming the audience any more than I want to be blaming the media. But if the habits of news consumption are just kind of scrolling quickly through a phone, really, what's the likelihood of really going into depth and providing the context and the nuance and the understanding if we know that folks are just kind of scrolling up on their phones?
Well, I think that's where your role and your talents as a journalist come in. It's your responsibility to get them to pay attention. That's what we do. So it's in your writing, it's in your reporting. I scroll too, but there are certain headlines that just catch my attention. And, once it catches my attention, then I'm going to click on it. And once I click on it, then I expect to, learn something that I didn't know, or, experience something that I've never experienced. So I do think that's our role as journalists, to inform people, to educate them and let them know what happened, and give some context when you are reporting about the shooting, like Max said. So that's our job, to do that, to make sure that we can grab people's attention, not with, salacious type of stuff, but that's what writers and journalists do.
Yeah. So no, I think that's a really important point. So Laura, you were brought into the Union Tribune just in the last year or so, in part, as I understood it, to maybe increase the number of voices from around the community, so that the conversations weren't just dominated by people in authority, people in power. How's that going?
You know what, Dean, this is a dream job for me. I spent most of my career in television news, and my heart will always be with TV news, but this position is so perfect for me, having been around San Diego for a while and understanding the complexities of the border and different beats, like, the environment beach community, and the fact that there are Latinos in North County, not just by the border, and that type of thing. So it's really kind of going back to a lot of my old contacts and people that I used to be in touch with that are still around, and just kind of reacquainting myself with what's going on, and what is the Union Tribune not covering that we should be covering? What communities are we not finding out what is important to that community? So it's been a really great situation and match for me so far to do that. And we've done a lot of outreach and a lot of different subjects of stories in the opinion pages that had never been done before. So I'm really proud of what I've been able to accomplish since I've been there.
Well, related to something like about the border, I know that the Union Tribune gets criticized when, let's say, in recent times, either a caravan approaching the U.S. border from the south, or the shutdown, or a border wall. It seemed like there was a time when all of those things were kind of coming together at the same time. And yet the Union Tribune was being criticized by some readers and consumers of saying, why do we keep talking about the border? Let's, who cares? And I know, Max, you've probably heard a similar thing when you've covered the border. Who cares about the border? How do you respond to that?
Well, you're talking about two really, really, really important things here, Dean. And one of them is, who has been the readership from the San Diego Union Tribune? Who are the people that were, used to getting that paper tossed in their driveway? Are those the only readers that we want? And the question is no. We need to move with the times here. If people are scrolling on their phone for news and information, then we need to find those digital readers and include them. And I guarantee you, if that were the case, you probably would not have heard so much criticism. The other thing that I would say to that is you can stand downtown San Diego and get on a high, floor of a building at the old Union Tribune building that we don't go to anymore, and you can see the border. Right. You can see the border. You can go to Target in Chula Vista and look in the parking lot and see how many of those plates are Baja plates. So I got news for anybody here that hasn't ever crossed the border, because there's plenty of people that have never crossed the border. This is a very binational, live on both sides of the border community. And so if people seem like, why do we care about what's it? There's a zillion reasons I could name that we don't have time to go into right now. But there's many, many reasons for this community to care about what's happening across the border, because it does and can affect San Diego in so many ways.
So actually, and to go back to LaMonica's point, if part of our job is to reflect the communities that we're in, that's part of our community. That's part of our region. Would you even say, Laura, not to put too much of an economic point on it, these are potential customers, these are readers, these are...
Absolutely. And I mean, who are we kidding? We all want more viewers and more clicks and more readers. We would be lying if any of us sat here and said we didn't want that. But if you don't serve the communities and they don't feel like there's a reason that you're only showing up in certain neighborhoods or covering certain issues or looking for those voices when they're negative stories or bad stories, you're not going to grow. And then the other thing that I was going to mention really quickly about what we were talking about earlier is there's a lot of people behind the scenes. There's a lot of things that happen in newsrooms behind the scenes that the general public and readers and viewers don't even know about. Journalists today are doing 5 times the work that they were when I first got here. In other words, someone that has a TV reporter job is doing 5 jobs. I only did 1. They're doing 5.
You're getting some cheers from LaMonica in the background there.
Yes, I'm just joking.
It is true. It is true. I taught for many years, and I never hid that from people that wanted to go into the industry because I didn't want them to be afraid. And then the salaries have come down tremendously too. That's a subject for another chat. But I think it's important for the public to know that your journalists that are working in this community, excuse me, and other communities, they're working really, really hard to bring you the news coverage that they do.
So since we were talking about the border just a minute ago, Max, let me ask you, for the people who let's say who never go into Mexico, who don't think of San Diego as kind of a multinational community, you cover the border and you cover immigration. When somebody says, who cares about that? How is it your job to make them care?
It's our job to broaden their horizons, right? Because information can always make society better. We're not offering a political opinion there. If you're going to close yourself off to the world as it exists, outcomes, regardless of political orientation, are going to be bad. So it's our job to broaden horizons. And, the experience, I've only been living here for around 4 years, but the experience of talking to people who've lived here their entire life, who haven't been to Tijuana, maybe they've been to other places in Mexico, maybe they caught a flight, to Cabo or something. But man, that was shocking to me. Just never got around to it. It's, you've got a completely separate country with different issues, but you guys have a lot more in common than you think, and a lot more flow between spaces. So, I think highlighting issues like local news here has done, on things like sewage between the two countries, things that we cannot ignore anymore, and pretend we're 2 different places, is really important because it ties people together. So we're going to keep telling you, why this sewage treatment issue is important and why you should care about outcomes in political elections in Baja California, because it impacts this. And it impacts your quality of life, which is very important to San Diegans. And if that's the way we can broaden your horizon, then that's how we're going to get you to that story. And then maybe you start caring about some other things, you get curious, and to what Laura was saying, you can't forget the bottom line here. The more we interest you in our coverage, the more you come back to us. We want to convert you into members, into, consumers. And that's part of offering a variety of coverage. If we're really burrowing down and just saying, we're giving you Point Loma development news again and again and again, then you're going to zone out, or we're just going to keep reaching smaller audiences.
Okay. So news organizations did an interesting thing, or have done an interesting thing in recent months. LaMonica, let me ask you about this. Even though these are, I'm going to give you examples primarily from newspapers. I would just love to hear your perspective on this. So you had the Los Angeles Times not too long ago publish an editorial from their own newsroom apologizing for their racial insensitivity and inequality in past news coverage. The Union Tribune did a similar thing. The Kansas City Star did a huge mea culpa. So as you look at something, those kinds of editorials, do you look at that and say, that's good, that's good, or do you say, let's see what the coverage is, going forward here? How do you react to some of these?
Multiple ways. I do think it's good. I do think it's necessary. But I want to see some action. I want to see the coverage change, and I want to see a difference in management, maybe. These things will continue if there are no different perspectives behind the scenes. It's great that they can acknowledge that they, didn't necessarily cover, certain issues the way they should have. That's great. But I'm a talker, but I'm not into talking. I want to see some improvement. I want to see some change, in staff and in leadership. It all starts at the top. So, it's just going to be a continuous cycle if, the person who's running that ship has that same perspective. So I haven't been able to keep up with, what's happening at the LA Times, but I do know they had a lot of issues with race inside, not just in coverage, but with their staff. And so, that is, to me, it's all connected. If at the top, those perspectives are not valued, then you're not going to see it in the coverage. And it's really that simple. So, for example, we just saw this case with, the guys at, CBS or, who are running that show. If those kind of things continue, then we're just going to keep saying the same problems over and over and over. It's not going to change unless leadership changes.
Yeah. So Laura, your paper was one of the ones that published one of these big apologies. Does that help in rectifying sins of the past?
Dean, I was not at the paper. Obviously, I'm brand new there, but I've been in this community, and I know that the reputation that former management had with the paper, right? So I didn't know how it was going to go over with the community, and that's really what I was more interested in. How are people going to react when they see this, right? And I think it was a good thing if, like LaMonica said, you say something like that, and then you really show that you're making the changes and you're really doing your part to do better. Management has changed. It's a new owner, going forward. They're just trying to let people know. And I don't think that I would have worked there under prior ownerships, me personally. But I love what the paper is doing now, and I can't count how many emails I've received from community members and readers that notice the changes. I see something in the chat right now too. And that makes it worthwhile. And as long as the paper continues, or any paper, I should say, or station or network makes that kind of a statement and then backs it up and really shows, the changes that they are going to make, I'm all for that, because I think there is still a lot of work to be done. everywhere.
Yeah. So one of the recurring themes I'm hearing from all three of you actually is management. There are not very many people, and I think we all know statistically this is accurate. There aren't that many people of color in news management positions, and there aren't that many reporters of color. Which
Why?
Pardon? Go ahead, LaMonica.
Why?
Well, I wasn't going to ask the why. I was going to ask, what do we do about that? Okay, but what I think those are related questions. Not only why are there not very many reporters, people in the news media of color, and if we think that's an important part of representing the community more accurately, what do we do about that? But let's go to your why question, LaMonica. Why do you think?
I mean, I just think that, that's a reflection of our society in general. It's not just the media where there are not enough people of color represented in management places. That's kind of, who we are and how we've been. So it's up to us. I think that viewers, people who support, us, they have to, say, this is what we want to see. And then it's up to the company to make those changes. I don't know why, but I would like to know why. I don't own a media company, so I don't get to make those decisions. But I do think it's important if we say we want to see these changes, then that's a part of it. Starts at the top.
Yeah. Max, do you have a sense of what can be done about this?
Just speaking from my, personal experience, I have an immense amount of privilege. I'm a white guy. This privileges me in a newsroom, extensively. And I've seen so many journalists of color, and especially female journalists of color, just have such a hard time. Not because they're not up for the job, they're better than the job. It's the workload is incredible, the stakes are really high, and the lack of support is incredible. The stuff that people have to put up with in these newsrooms and all newsrooms, because this is endemic, is, you see people burn out after 1 year, 2 years. The stories I've heard, it makes total sense to me why no change can happen just by just saying, well, we'll open up more entry-level positions for women of color, for journalists of color, for minority journalists. Well, they're just going to burn out. That door has been revolving for years and years. Unless you actually change the culture and the management there and actually create a space for people to succeed, then they're just going to fail, and you're going to feel okay because, well, that person left, but we've replaced them with another person of color. And that's just not going to work because they're going to burn out too. You are keeping a system going that just burns people out and makes them feel uncomfortable and make them feel, more importantly, unwelcome.
So what I heard was sexism and racism. That's what I heard Max say, that's part of the issue as to why we see these changes, in management or in staff. And so what can we do about that? We need to fix that as a society in general. So when we, look at ourselves and say we want to do better as a nation, as a country, as a society, then those things will change. But until then, it will still be, sexism and racism keeping us from getting where we need to get.
So Laura, you've been in both management and you've been on the education side as well. What do you think are some ways to address what Max and LaMonica are saying? These are clearly societal issues, not just within the news media, but we're in the news media. So what can we do about this?
Well, I've never been in management actually, Dean, but thank you for that.
I thought you were now, and I thought you were with.
No, I'm not considered a manager. I'm not considered a manager, although, I will tell you this: there's a very good, strong number of ethnic professional media organizations. I think you've been a part of SPJ for a long time. You know, when I first met you, it was through the California Chicano News Media Association, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, the San Diego Association of Black Journalists, the Asian American Journalists. There's a Native American Journalists Association. So those groups do a lot of work to try to increase the numbers of journalists of color across the country. I don't think there's enough managers that have those personal relationships with these groups that will say to them, hey, we're going to have this position open. I don't think there's enough mentoring that goes on, because that could make a huge difference. And the other thing that I just want to throw out there is that there's also this little bit of misconception that just because somebody has a surname or a skin color that they automatically, you know, should go into this category or group, because I've met some really, really incredible journalists in San Diego who were not Latino by blood, but they covered the border better than anybody else I knew. And there's also, on the flip side, been agents and managers who have encouraged people to use their great grandmother's maiden name so that they can have a name on the screen. And it's not in their heart, you know, they don't speak the language, and they don't care to get involved in the community. So those things are really important to point out. It's not like a one size fits all, but in terms of your original question, like how to do better, I think mentoring, you know, early on, getting high school students and college students who of color who want to go into journalism, or maybe they weren't even thinking about going into journalism. They're good writers, or you know, there's just got to be that mentoring and that encouragement. And then on the company side and the management side, to be honest and say, we want to do better, help us do better, you know, and do that outreach.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm amazed at are the number of people who might come to you, Laura, and say, Laura, what does the Hispanic community think about such and such? Just because you're Hispanic, you know, you can speak for your people. I can't
speak for everybody, but I will tell you this: I would appreciate them trying to ask and saying, "We don't understand this. Where can we go?" I can at least help point them in the right direction. I have no problem with that, and I think that should happen more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Laura on that. You know, I pride myself in being a journalist who can pretty much cover anything, but I have no shame in my game when I say that part of the reason I became a journalist is to give a voice to people who look like me, who don't have one, whose stories often get untold or not told in the right way. And I'm perfectly okay with someone asking me, hey, is it, you know, what do you think about this? Or, you know, is this what, you know, the African-American community is really thinking right now? Because I'd rather you get it right. And not to say that I can speak, you know, for the entire African-American community. We have different voices. Not everybody agrees on everything. But for the most part, you know, if you were to ask me something about the community that I'm a part of, I probably could give you a pretty decent answer. So I appreciate it if someone respects it enough to come to me and say, hey, we want to get this right. We don't want to be insensitive. Like, I appreciate that. And I don't have a problem being that go-to person at all.
I think that's a really helpful response, because I do think there are people who might say, well, I don't want to talk to LaMonica and about this just because she's a Black person, you know, or something. But and you're saying, no, talk to me. I'll help get you there.
I mean, it's all about approach now. You know, don't come at me sideways saying something crazy. You know what I mean. But you know, respectfully ask me what you need to know, and it's fine. It's not a problem. I just think we have to be able to communicate with each other. We have to be able to talk. It's the only way we are going to get to the next level in this country when it comes to race and issues of race, is to communicate with one another so that you will know what I or, you know, African Americans may find offensive or whatever the case may be. So it's important for us to talk. I don't know everything about, you know, other communities. So I should be able to ask in a respectful way, you know, about something I'm not familiar with.
Sure. So actually, a way forward see what you think of this. And Max, this goes to a little bit of your background. I wonder if one of the ways forward in covering communities better, being better representatives of different aspects of society, is what we see happening a lot in the news media, which is going to niche kinds of media, niche sites. You've got one website, for instance, the Marshall Project, that focuses primarily on justice issues and on prison reform and things like that. You've got other sites that just focus on religion. You've got other sites that just focus. Is that kind of where we're all going? So the kind of the general interest news radio that you're a part of, or the Union Tribune's part of, or television that LaMonica's part of, are we just going to kind of depend on the fragmentation here?
I think, that's part of it, because that's kind of resourcing under-resourced coverage areas and kind of throwing money at it and reporters at something that basically local news, because it's stretched so thin. And I should mention KPBS also does a TV show every night. So we are also, doing things in every format possible.
Right.
That can help, but as long as those don't get siloed off. So you love to see when larger investigative outlets like ProPublica, like the Marshall Project, team up with local news outlets, and they've been teaming up with local TV, local newspapers, helping to kind of spread their networks and resources. And that's the future. I think if we keep competing against each other, nothing's going to be left, because it's two older, tired boxers at this point. So we got to work together, and I think that will help. And something that I see kind of outside of the niche publications is outreach to specific communities and trying to get community members to become journalists and news advocates, people who want other people in the community to get into local news, to even outside of running for office or something like that, just being an aware kind of community member. And so we need to do a lot better job of working with young people to make them into media makers, because they're good and they're ready and they're smart. And we have a bunch of local organizations that are doing great work on that. I'm thinking Media Arts Center, Aja, which does photography. These are programs that are already laying the groundwork for the next generation, but we need so much more of that.
Can I just add, I agree with Max, but I think the question is why? Why have there been so many niche publications and websites? Why was there a need to start that? Is it because mainstream media, whatever you want to call that, was not tackling these issues, ignoring them? In television, we don't have a lot of time. We do 30 minutes, but why was this necessary? Why is it necessary to have the GRIO to specifically talk about issues that affect the African-American community? Maybe because it wasn't being addressed. So there's always a why, that's the way we're going. It looks like that's the future, but the question is why? And when you figure out the why, then you can move forward and, figure out how to proceed when you know why something is happening.
Do you have an idea why, LaMonica?
Yeah, because mainstream media they're not covering these issues. And again, there could be a lot of reasons for that, resources, or they, simply don't care, whatever. They don't think those people watch them or read their newspaper. There's a plethora of reasons why, but it's important to know why. So then you can look at this and say, is it necessary? Do we need to continue to do this? And I think that we do. We do need to have ProPublica. Yeah. We do need to have the GRIO. We do need to have those the Marshall Project, so that we can fill these gaps.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start to pull this toward the end here, and then if there are some questions from the audience, we can send them in the chat and we can address those. But let me ask each of you this: in recent years, the trust in the news media is on the decline. me make it gracious. And then you have certain political leaders who are actually really fomenting that lack of trust, and there's this sense of resentment, and that we have bias and we make stuff up. If you could just talk to the public and say, here's what we're trying to do, what would you tell them? Max, what would you say? Here's what we're trying to do here. We're not the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the kind of Fox News, we report, you decide model, you know, that kind of got tossed out the window. People think uniformly now that you're being told what to think by media. I think the best we can do is try to kind of create informed consumers, kind of know exactly what you're seeing, how it's being packaged, learn, you know, kind of how the sausage gets made for these articles and stuff, so that if you're reading a well-researched article that has like 5-6 different sources, you could say, okay, this is legit. If you're reading a blog post that is somebody's opinion, well, that's an opinion, you know. I think it goes to just basic media literacy, and that's, you know, comes in education. We don't do it in high school, and people are now accessing media at a super young age through social media. So it comes with acknowledging and learning, you know, how to digest that, and that's really tough. And, you know, I don't have anything to say to people who just kind of want to run up to you and say, fake news, you're the enemy, because I understand that's a political statement that is being used for somebody's advantage. It's not really my job to convince you otherwise, because that's another job I have, and I don't have time for that. All I can do is basically, you know, speak truth to power, write the truth, hold people accountable, and hope that basically the structures around it improve, that people can begin to acknowledge news in a non-combative fashion. But I'm not going to convince you otherwise if you're coming at it with that I'm a fraud.
Yeah. What about you, Laura? Is there a way we can explain ourselves better?
Well, you know, news and opinion is completely separate, and there's still a lot of people out there that don't know the difference. And maybe part of it is we don't label it clear enough and say, this is news, this is opinion. But
so they see something like what Max was saying, that this was a blog post, and over here, this is a 5-source story. Those are equivalent, right?
Yes.
You're saying? And
I think our job is to educate, to inform, to get you to think, and also to entertain on some of the stories that you can do those lighter features, or just, like I said, open that door to the border and take people to the border and show them it's not all drugs. It's not all immigration. There are 5-star restaurants. There are amazing spas. There's so much more.
There's,
you know,
art museums, there's concert. Yes. Yeah, there's all that.
So just kind of get people to open their mind and their heart and know their community a little bit. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard somebody say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was in San Diego. So, you know, that's what we can do. And that's what I think I try to do when I show up.
But when the public expresses their just mistrust in the Union Tribune, can you address that?
I personally can't address it because I haven't been there long enough, but I will. I have no problem telling them that. Like, we understand, we get it. You know, the paper has changed names, the paper has changed ownership, the paper has changed bylines. I would say give us a chance. Give us a chance. Yeah. Give this newness. Just give it a chance before you say it. It's like you bring a friend over and you want them to taste something. You know, getting someone who's not Mexican to taste menudo for the first time. They're like, I don't know. But I'm just like, if you don't tell them what it is and you just say, taste it, just taste it. If you don't like it, you won't hurt my feelings. You don't have to have it, but taste it. And I would say the same thing. Just, you know, try. And you don't have to agree with everything. It's okay. I don't agree with everything. But there's a way to tell the media, I don't agree with you, besides telling them you're the enemy of the people.
Yeah. LaMonica, can we explain ourselves better? in our role in society?
To some people. To some people. I don't think that we'll be able to reach everybody at this point. I think social media changed the game in a good way, and in some ways not so good, because you have people who have not spent a day in journalism school who people think are journalists, but they're really bloggers just giving their opinion. And people want their opinions validated, and they consider that news. So whatever you're already thinking, they're just going to find somebody who's agreeing with them and call that journalism or the media or whatever. And that's kind of the world that we are living in right now. So, you know, with social media, you know, it's allowed people to have more of a voice, because you do have these niche publications that are getting the facts out, telling these stories. And then on the other hand, you have people who are literally just kind of making up stuff, conspiracy theories and all this, and people believe it. So I don't know that there's anything we can do to, you know, make it any better for the media or to change their minds. People are going to think what they want to think. And all I can do is just tell the truth. I'm all about the receipts and the facts. You know, this is what I know. And if I find out something else, I will tell you. And that's all you can do. I think it's just kind of fun for people to kind of bash the media. Like, you know, it's just some entity that they don't really see. But it's us. It's really us. We're real people here, you know, who have spent our careers trying to inform people so that they can make educated decisions. And I don't know. I'm kind of up in the air on the fence about whether or not we can fix it. All I can do is just try and do my job.
So actually, let me really start to wrap this up. LaMonica, since I'm talking with you, you've only been in San Diego a few months. How does San Diego have you been able to assess? I realize we're in a pandemic here, and so everybody's kind of working from their own little silos, but have you been able to assess racially the vibe in San Diego compared to where you've been before, Seattle and Buffalo, New York? What are you seeing?
I'm seeing America. I think, you know, it's not that much different from any other major city. You're going to have people on both sides of the line, people who, you know, want everybody to be equal and, you know, everybody to have a fair shot. And then you have people who don't want that. I think that's pretty much everywhere. I don't want to, you know, blame San Diego for that. It's not a San Diego problem. It's an American problem. And because of the pandemic, I have not been able to get out as much, but, you know, I like it. I like the people. And I'm not just saying that because I wouldn't just say that, but I do. I have gotten
I'm certain you would not.
I would not, but I have a really good impression thus far, and I've had a good experience so far. I mean, I grew up in California, so I think I can just kind of relate a little bit more to the diversity and, you know, all the things that come with, you know, being in this great state. So yeah, no, I haven't detected anything different than any other major city, to be honest.
All right. Well, welcome to San Diego. Max, Laura, I'm setting you up. I'm going to end with you. Max, what's your sense of kind of the racial vibe? You came from New York, a completely different kind of world, and different kinds of tensions and different kinds of compatibilities. Now that you've been here for 3 or 4 years, what's your sense of kind of the racial way we deal with one another in this city?
Yeah, I mean, San Diego is you know, to what LaMonica was saying, very similar to other parts of the country, but it's a little bit on the bleeding edge. If you think of California as being 20 years before the country, then you think of Southern California is, you know, kind of 30 years before the rest of the country. So it's moving in some really interesting directions. You're seeing a political shift in the city and county that's been going on, a kind of, you know, young professionals moving in, immigration continuing, you know, and really kind of rallying around welcoming refugees into the county, welcoming immigrants into the county. But it's a huge area. If you look at the growth in the exurbs, those have really specific political inclinations. Those are a lot of people moving out from the city, and kind of that's happening all over the place. And so, you know, I think it is not a monolith, the city itself, and basically it's moving in some really good directions in terms of you know, law enforcement, accountability, better communication between communities. And in some other ways, it's got the same problems as everywhere else: lack of communication, hiding behind, you know, obfuscation, you know, it's nobody's responsibility. Oh, that something just happened. So, you know, I think it is a great place to report from, because it is a large canvas on which to paint and to continue asking questions. Because there's a lot we don't see that happens in San Diego, especially given that it has a huge federal law enforcement apparatus that is, for the most part, hidden from view.
Yeah, yeah. So Laura, let me kind of end with you. You've been in Chicago and Tucson, and now you've been here for a long time. Can you just maybe show us, give us just a quick sense of kind of where you think we're headed as a community, specifically as it relates to race and ethnicity, and really what the news media, what our role is in here? I asked you a big final question here,
yeah,
so
I'll
you
try
got
to
it.
keep it short. Wrap me up if I start going too long.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
But I will say, Dean, I never meant to stay here. That is the truth. I came here in my heart and mind. I was passing through. I was going to put my time in San Diego and head back to Chicago, because that was my plan. But this community amazed me. This community amazed me, as far as covering news and finding stories that were just unbelievable. It just grabbed me as a journalist. Like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And that goes from an inner city kid like me who, you know, saw surfers, like people carrying surfers. I never saw that in my life, you know, to the border. You know, I'm Mexican American, but I didn't spend a lot of time in Mexico. So that whole fascination, you know, grabbed me. So, and then the other thing is, when I was flying in to San Diego, when you see the skyline, and nothing could be further from the truth. San Diego is not this big giant city with a big skyline. It's more like a town. And I think for the most part, people are very kind here. You know, you have that California layback, you know, mañana kind of thing, which is good for somebody that's grown up with this hubbub of the city moving and, you know, taking the train all the time and that kind of thing. And just the awareness, I think, of, you know, environmental issues. People care about clean air and some issues that I don't see. The thing that I do think that, as you know, to answer your question directly, where we're headed, I'm kind of proud of the people, the way they're starting to speak up about issues. Because when I was reporting, I had to dig a lot to find the other side. You know, I grew up in a city where, you know, there were boycotts and people, you know, there was activists, and, you know, there was, boom, you didn't have to look for that other side. But here I found years ago that you had to do that. And I'm starting to see people they're awake, they're speaking, they're, you know, we're seeing some inroads, as Max mentioned, in politics, where we're seeing more people of color and women, LGBT, you know, communities starting to get involved and speak up. So as far as the media, I'm seeing some changes in the media. I think there's a way to go. I'm seeing San Diego blossom from this little quiet town, beach town, to the, you know, more complex place to live. And, you know, so many people wouldn't stay here if that wasn't the case. It's pretty darn expensive. That's the part that I think is unfair in a lot of ways, that leaves a lot of communities marginalized and left out of the loop. But as far as where we're headed, I think everything that happened last year has really opened a lot of eyes. And I think there is room to grow. And I think we're headed in that direction in all aspects. I really do.
Okay, this is great. So let me just close with a question from an audience member who says, how can audience, readers, viewers, consumers, encourage news organizations to do the very things we've been talking about for the last hour, which is either increase coverage, do better coverage of certain communities, maybe have more diversity in their staffs. What can consumers do to help encourage your station, LaMonica, or Max, or your paper, Laura? What can they do? Go ahead, LaMonica.
You know, in television, we get a lot of emails, we get phone calls about all sorts of stuff. You know, I don't like what you're wearing today. I don't like the way you look. She's fat. If you have time to do that, then you have time to write into management and say, I want to see more of this, and do it respectfully. I think that consumers have power, and I don't know that they know that, but you are our viewers and we care about what you think. So if you have time to do those things, then you should have the time to say, this is what I want to see, or I don't see this being represented. Can you do something about that? And it's either yay or nay. But I think people should use their power and time to do constructive things, like say, this is what I'd like to see, and can you do that?
Interestingly, I read there's an algorithm somewhere in there that one email or letter from a viewer when it comes to coverage or something like that actually represents X number of thousand people.
I think it could, yeah.
Yeah, so that readers and audience members and viewers, they do have a tremendous amount of influence if they would speak in a constructive way. Max, can the audience engage with your station and encourage or certain kinds of coverage? Or
yeah, absolutely. We have at the bottom, we don't have comments, but at the bottom of every news story, there is this thing called Hearken, where you could ask us questions or give us feedback, and shock of all shocks, we read all of those. And I've gotten great story ideas through them. I've connected with people. I've learned things about stories that I've reported on. You know, that some of my best stories, or the ones I felt most fulfilled by and actually had the largest impact, came from readers and listeners and viewers who reached out. And that's so important for news, and something that we didn't, have before. We had a tips inbox, but this allows you to comment directly, and having a phone call with a viewer or reader is awesome. So reach out, because that makes our job easier. We don't mind it. We never mind it. We're nosy people. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, the idea of the news media just kind of being one way going this direction, that's gone now. So it really is kind of a give and take. Laura, finish us off. We're out of time. What can viewers, readers, scrollers, consumers do to engage the news media better and help encourage them to cover issues better, to have different kind of even diversity in their staffs?
I'll say exactly what LaMonica said, voice your opinion, not just on the bad stuff that you don't like, that is important, but also on the good stuff. When you see something you like, let the management know. Sorry, Jeff Light, I hope you don't get a million emails. Also, the other thing that I wanted to say that I think is really, really important is that you can write for the UT, send us your op-eds. We don't just reach out to ask people to write op-eds. We evaluate the ones we get. So send us a 750-word op-ed. We evaluate them all. Can't make promises that it'll get published, but it very well might. And also letters to the editor, 150 words, send them. And that's why I love the fact that this is sponsored by the library, because I think people that are involved in the libraries are the people that read and they try to know what's going on in their community. So that's how I would end it.
That's great. Thank you all very, very much. LaMonica, taking part of your day off. Max, keeping you from reporting on important stuff. Laura, keeping you from reading important things and writing important things. Thank you for taking this time to talk with us. So I'm going to go back to Jacqueline from the library.
Thank you so much, Dean. This was a fantastic panel. I really appreciate your time, LaMonica, Laura, and Max, and Dean for moderating. I hope everyone really enjoyed this presentation. I know I really learned a lot. This is presented in part with our Coronado Community Read. We have events going on all month during the month of February based on our book of choice, which is Stamped from the Beginning by Abram Kendi. So please check out our website, cplevents.org, for the rest of the events going on. Thank you again for all of your time. This will be posted on our website as well.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.